Welcome back to another edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. I'm Tim O'Malley, joined today by Drew Mentalk of Irish Illustrated and John Bryce of Football Scoop. And we had some news, scheduling news I did not expect to pop since our last podcast on Monday. The Notre Dame Clemson series will go home and home for 12 years, beginning in 2027. And Drew, it was there was already a game scheduled for 2027 and 2028, and a couple down the line. But this was one we were waiting on. I guess the question was, would it be some sort of collection of Clemson, Florida State, and Miami? But this will be fun for Notre Dame and Clemson fans and people that like to go to Greenville to have a mid-October vacation.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely, I mean, of the three they talked about, I think it made the most sense because I feel like in more recent years, I know there's a history with Miami and Florida State, but Clemson's definitely the one that sticks out to me as like there seems to be more of a modern rivalry, especially when you look at the games over since 2015 that they've played on one another's campus. All have been decided by one score. I believe you've had some really close kind of historic games, including, Notre Dame winning two in the stadium. I mean, even the 2015 game, that was before I covered the team, but I know that's a classic game as well. So I think there really is a rivalry there, and it's really teams that they really show up on each other's campus. The only two blowouts were either in the ACC championship or in the college football semifinals in 2018. So Clemson, it's really been a good series for sure.
Yeah, Indy got him pretty good, blew him out here in 2022, but that was a 10-0 Clemson team that I think most of us picked. I know I picked Notre Dame to win, but it was more along the lines of like they're just kind of due to get them, and then they're absolutely murdering them, and Benjamin Morrison has that great day, and they're running the ball on Clemson, and you're like, I did not expect this at all, but I think that really helped Marcus in his first year, JB, because that was I mean, that was obviously that uneven's the wrong term for that year. That was a strange year for Marcus, but when you beat 10-0 Clemson at home, that kind of cemented him for a bit.
Yeah, that was in many ways his first signature win, and obviously he's stacked several more since that time.
Yeah,
But
a little more important too.
that was a defining moment in the opening tenure for Marcus Freeman, and it was a statement moment. It was a night game, and Clemson was undefeated. Maybe Clemson had a scare the week before, but they came into that game consensus top five. They were number one in some polls, I believe, and just a massive victory for Notre Dame to get that done the way that they got that done. And then they took out Caleb Williams and USC in Neyland Stadium the next year, or excuse me, in Notre Dame Stadium the next year in another signature moment. But that was the one. That was the first moment. He had other nice wins that season and obviously ended up beating South Carolina in the bowl game. And I don't think he's lost to an SEC team yet at Notre Dame. So that was huge. The series makes a lot of sense. Clemson had been one of the more vocal about needing more money and deserving more money from the ACC, and it had more water to carry in its bucket with those arguments than Miami or Florida State right now. Florida State made that noise coming off of its great 2023 season, but overall, Florida State has trended very much downward most of this decade. So it makes a lot of sense there. I don't think we're done seeing Notre Dame getting more of the cream of the crop of the ACC. But that's going to be interesting for the ACC to navigate because I know this from talking to people throughout the league. Everybody wants Notre Dame. Everybody wants that Notre Dame home game. And if you start telling teams that, hey, you're going to earn less money, and also you're going to get Notre Dame less because we're going to prioritize Clemson, Florida State, and Miami, you're going to have some hurt feelings throughout that league.
I'm happy with the Cal Berkeley Notre Dame home and home to cover. We'll fly out there in November, of course. But if it's Miami, I think Miami noting that they just want to play Notre Dame more was an interesting development after the. And I like that idea. Honestly, I'm not sure how many teams you do want to lock into in a six-season home and home because it sure is fun that Notre Dame had Texas A&M home and home. That they're going to have Alabama home and home. I mean, Ohio State was obviously a lot of angst-ridden stuff there, but that looking forward to that for years was important. So I would like to see Notre Dame play Miami more. I feel like they play Florida State the right amount if that would continue. Doesn't seem like they need to play Florida State more, but as much as I do not like the Tallahassee trip, Doak Campbell Stadium is fantastic atmosphere at night for college football. Notre Dame there in at night in 14 and 21, and both just tremendous atmospheres for games, splitting those. But do you think, and this was a question, Drew, that was could have had on segment 2 from Statman 72. But what do you think, guys, this does with Stanford? Is it something where Notre Dame can play Stanford less than it's what it's doing now? And of course, Jack Swarbrick was a huge proponent of playing Stanford every year, but the recruiting utility has gone away because you're coming home now after that's over. Your signing day is right there the next week. So I think the West Coast necessity has gone away a little bit every other year.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think even, yeah, you like you mentioned recruiting, like Notre Dame used to they'd be on the West Coast and then they'd start going seeing recruits, and it just kind of made some of those travel and things like that easy. And you're right, that probably is less relevant. I think it's important to note that the Clemson game, that it does count towards the allotment of games Notre Dame needs to play in the ACC each year. So potentially that could open up to like make it easier to keep Stanford, because it's not like it's adding an extra
Mhm.
game that they have to play in addition to those five potentially. So that will definitely be interesting. I agree. It's not. I think in more recent years, like it seemed like, oh, why? Like that's an important game. Like why would they get rid of that? But now it does seem, especially with the evolution of college football and stuff, maybe that's less important. And I do think it's important. Even you want to appease some of this, not even for Notre Dame's perspective, but you want to appease Florida State and Miami to a degree, as long as Clemson, because they talked about trying to get out of the conference, and this is just another step to Notre Dame cements their independence to a degree by making sure there's less realignment down the road with that. So maybe you sacrifice, you appease those teams to a degree and schedule them more often and lose Stanford after you also did them a favor to kind of get them in the ACC too. Like I feel like Notre Dame did them a solid that like probably makes it a little more okay if they let go of that annual series as well.
Yeah, I wonder about this new 12-year Clemson series, what impact it has on Stanford or USC, and we're waiting to see how much USC's Big Ten membership maybe impacts that series in the future. I know there's been some concern about Notre Dame losing that series or that series going away because it is a nationally compelling
Yeah.
series. It's not just important to Notre Dame and to USC. That's a series. That's a game that draws significant eyeballs every year, no matter where it is. So, if I think this year Stanford was about the last game we saw announced for Notre Dame, or that we learned of being announced for Notre Dame. There was thought that it might have been going away as soon as this year. So I think that one remains the most likely to be played less frequently as part of this, especially if Notre Dame has to play five ACC teams every year to fulfill its agreement. And there are going to be some years coming up where it has at least two of the three of Clemson, Miami, and Florida State, if not all three. There's just not a lot of options left there among the other 13 ACC teams to get a piece of Notre Dame in those seasons. So I do think that's a significant impact. I know we've got some questions about Notre Dame's independence, or that's been a point of discussion with that news this week. I believe Notre Dame positioned itself to maintain its independence
Yeah. Yep.
with the work that was already done in the expanded college football playoff. Once Notre Dame made the concession that it was willing, at least in this initial iteration of an expanded playoff, to not be a top four host, that cleared a pathway for Notre Dame to still be a playoff participant, to still be able to host a game, just not get a bye as one of the top four. And I think that the work it's done scheduling will has further cemented its position as an independent. I've talked to people on campus. There's no sense that Notre Dame has any interest whatsoever in not being independent. I think Pete Bavacqua has told some people at some Notre Dame events around the country that they're committed to maintaining their independence. And so I think Notre Dame has taken the appropriate steps to do exactly that. I will be curious with, Alabama on the schedule in a few years, and I think Texas as well. I'll be very, very curious to see how many of those games hold as we move forward,
Yeah.
because
I hope
because
Alabama
the
holds. That's too
yeah,
fun. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. But the SEC later this month, the SEC has its annual spring meetings in Sandestin, Florida, and one of the key topics of discussion this year is going to be a potential 9-game conference football schedule. And they nearly moved to that model a couple of years ago, and it got tabled. Now you're going to see arguments for both sides, but if the playoff is going to expand to 14 or 16 teams, and that was the consensus last week in Frisco at the DFO meetings, that it will expand by 27 at the latest, then I think you'll see the SEC more likely to move to a 9-game schedule, even though Lane Kiffin and some of the others, Shane Beamer, are going to bark about wanting just an 8-game schedule because they felt they somehow got left out of the playoffs last year.
I didn't talk to Pete Pavacqua about this at our 2 hour and 15-minute confirmation for our children on Sunday a couple days ago, but I did talk to Jack Swarbrick about it, and he notes that the 14, when it inevitably goes to 14 for a couple years before it goes to 16, 14 is even better for Notre Dame to remain independent. Now, 16 it would be uncharted waters for that because obviously the format changes. But the one thing he brought up was he always foresaw it going to 14, and that was better for Notre Dame's independence as well. And this is not something I've ever asked either one of them, but I firmly believe that the Notre Dame graduate that's the athletic director does not want to be the athletic director when Notre Dame stops being independent. In other words, they will fight tooth and nail to not be the athletic director if that day ever comes. Seems like a good day came today, and Drew Mentock's all over it, all over our Irish Illustrated front page. That tweet from Ross Dellinger that Pete Bavacqua was the first to speak out. I'll just read his tweet. Ross Dellinger from Yahoo Sports. Notre Dame AD Pete Bavacqua, long a proponent of phasing in the roster limits, tells Yahoo Sports that the school will honor the roster spots of all current athletes and permit those who are cut this year to return, becoming the first school to fully commit to grandfathering in athletes. And Drew, I will turn it over to you because you already have a story up on this at irishillustrated.com. All good news, and it's kind of cool that Notre Dame was the first one to officially speak on it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he came out pretty quickly. It sounds like yesterday. The NCAA empowered conferences kind of got together and adjusted their filing for the House settlement. That would enable, it wouldn't mandate that schools have to grandfather in athletes, but it would permit them to do so if they wanted to. So that's still my understanding, that still would need to be approved. But it's important that even before that's approved, you have somebody like Pete Pavacqua getting out and saying Notre Dame would absolutely do this, and he did so quickly before any other school as well, and that would yes, I mean Notre Dame's commitment. Maybe that's indicative of Notre Dame's kind of quiet transfer portal spring as well, because you have a school that's so committed to, like, we want this to be part of it, and for them to get out in front of it as well. So, and it would also, I think it was worth noting that the proposed rules, if they're changed, would also apply to incoming recruits who committed to the school based on previous roster sizes as well. So that would grandfather them as well. And I believe it also, the grandfather exemption applies to if a player transfers, that they would have that going forward too.
I want to just chime in here. Obviously, Tim O'Malley dreams about 105-man rosters at this point because we've talked about it so much. And
Oh my God.
as much as we've talked about it on these podcasts, we've talked about it almost equally so in our staff's text message groups and things of that nature. But again, I understand why the judge is doing this. It's she feels she's protecting the integrity and the opportunity for some student athletes. It's been a long, protracted process that is causing a lot of problems for schools. And so I did want to share, I visited with an SEC executive a couple of weeks ago as my wife was traveling to run the Big Sur Marathon. And we had a really long talk, and I was asking him what kind of predicament it was going to be, since at that point in time it was very clear they weren't going to 105 this year and they could be up to 120. And he told me, direct quote, "We've operated at the 105 number since January. We actually had less than 100 players throughout our spring camp. Now we're in a situation where we had a list of 20 walk-on guys basically that we were going to use to fill our roster from 85 to 105. Now we have to develop and meet as a staff to find another list of 15 guys for those additional walk-on spots that we did not expect to have." So they had tried to do the right thing, much like the University of Iowa, which operated at a 105 as early as last December. So they tried to do the right thing to give these young student athletes plenty of time to find additional opportunities. And now these are just two examples of numerous programs that are in a bit of a bind. So it also highlights that Notre Dame took a very smart approach and did not want to cut anybody until it absolutely had to cut anyone. So again, credit to Marcus Freeman and Mike Martin and Notre Dame's brain trust for how they manage their rosters in that regard. But the point made to me was walk-on positions have always been voluntary positions. You've not been obligated to carry up to the 120. And as pointed out to me at DFO meetings last week by multiple directors of football operations in multiple conferences, a lot of people never carried 120 until the COVID year hit. And then that's when rosters expanded. So one guy that was from a Big Ten program, a DFO there, said we never had 120 until the last 6 years with COVID.
The interesting thing for me, though, is for Notre Dame specifically, their walk-on program has gotten to the point where the players are I don't guess recruited is not the right word, but they are. They're recruited to come to Notre Dame without a scholarship. Notre Dame has, I don't know if people know this or not, one walk-on that is on the team, Jerry Rulo, the linebacker, who went to walk-on tryouts as a college student and won a spot. So Notre Dame does have of these walk-ons, they got a lot of guys that they've asked to come to the school. Now, of course, they're not guaranteed anything. That's a great point, but I feel like some teams that have very good walk-on programs have probably found it a little tougher to pull out a cut. And as I said, this is the ugly part of it. When you recruit these walk-ons to your school, preferred walk-ons, and Luke Talich is an extreme example, but let's use him anyway because he's a top. All right, if everything goes wrong, he's a top half of the roster player. He might be a top 22 player on the team. He's a lot better than some of the scholarship players. And that's where it was tough for me that you want to keep these walk-ons and you're like, well, we have to get rid of a couple scholarship players. That's when it gets ugly for Notre Dame.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And none of us was ever advocating that Notre Dame should just cast these walk-ons to the side and move forward in an extreme business model as much as college football is big business. I just knew that the numbers are going to necessitate it, and we're still going to get there. It's going to be phased in. Right. We're still going to get to much smaller rosters. You make a great point about how programs and Notre Dame had Max Hurlman, who was technically a walk-on after starring at Colgate, and now he's in Steelers camp. But another interesting point you bring up, T.O., as to how these programs recruit walk-ons. Tennessee is a lottery state. Georgia is a lottery state. And so those schools have, or those states have hope lotteries, hope scholarships. And so both of those programs, for example, use the lottery scholarship to get preferred walk-ons. And
really? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And so maybe you have an FCS football scholarship, but you're a quarterback who wants to try and come be a walk-on and see if you can earn a spot at Tennessee. Well, all of a sudden you're getting the hope scholarship, and then you were getting NIL money on top of that. And I know that example. I know that example for fact at Tennessee, but again, it's something that Georgia has been able to use. I think Florida as well, and maybe Texas, these states that have their hope scholarships that are tied to being funded by the lottery. And so you graduate, you can go to an in-state school for free. That is a loophole that some other institutions have used to get, quote, preferred walk-ons.
Looking to upgrade your wardrobe? Founded by Notre Dame alum Go Wang, you've seen ESQ's custom clothing on the player walk and all of your favorite players and coaches. With more than a decade of making the best bespoke clothing available, ESQ will help you look and feel your best. From a perfect fitting suit or sport coat, shirt or bomber jacket, or that perfect tuxedo for wedding season, check out esqclothing.com and book an appointment to upgrade your wardrobe today. Mention Irish Illustrated and get 10% off your entire purchase. That's esqclothing.com. We'll be back with segment 2, Burning Up the Boards. Welcome back to segment 2, Burning Up the Boards. Our first question from JJ Post, friend of the show, by the way, recent graduate of the Irish. I believe Pete has said CJ Carr winning the job outright this spring would have been one of few spring storylines that could have made a serious impact on his view of the team's ceiling. What are some other developments that would have merited inclusion on such a list? So I kind of read this to say that they did not have these developments because we'd have already talked about that, I would assume.
Yeah, for me, it would have been if you just saw even that depleted offensive line looking completely dominant, which we did not see. But if you had seen, and there's a lot of talent there. I talked to somebody on campus this week who feels like that they genuinely, once they get healthy in the fall, will go 8 to 10 really quality dudes deep on the OL. So I thought that was interesting. But if that offensive line had been fairly dominant, despite having basically no starters out there for the balance of the spring camp, that would have been one for me. If you had seen the wide receivers just absolutely dominating day in and day out, even without a Malachi Fields in the mix and with limited participation from some other guys. So I think you got some encouraging things. And Noah Burnett would have been another one. Like
Thought about him. Yeah.
if we had just seen him never miss a kick,
Right.
then that would have been a big one for me because you're going to need that with this schedule. You're probably going to have a game you have to win with a fourth quarter field goal. So those for me are the three I would say. I know we've got a question about it, so I won't step on it too much. But I think you exit spring camp very encouraged by what you saw on the defensive line. There's reaffirmation of what I think we all believed about the linebacker position, and then we saw some other guys step up in the secondary.
Yeah, I agree. The wide receiver stood out to me quite a bit just in terms of if you had, I mean, I think there's always reasons to be optimistic about Jaden Greathouse, but to see him kind of take that step forward where we every time we saw him, he was making big plays on guys, some of their better corners, I guess, are really showing out. I think that could have done good. I mean, I think back to I think it was 2019 when, Chase Claypool was owning Troy Pride in
Yes.
practices, and
Yeah.
Brian Kelly even had to remind him, he's like, that's a future first round pick. And if Jaden Greathouse would have made that jump, maybe not that you're like he's a future first round pick, even though some people are projecting that as a possibility, but just to see him kind of go out and be like, well, we know he's doing this against some of the best cornerbacks in the country. And Troy Pride was a fourth round pick to clarify. So it turned out pretty well there. But I think having somebody solidified like that in the receiving corner, we have more reason to believe we can get playoff Jaden Greathouse, kind of from the jump this season would have been a really positive sign.
I have a few, and one was not possible, but had Malachi Fields been here, and we saw Malachi Fields and CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie were dealing with Malachi Fields already, I think that would kind of assuage some concerns mild concerns for the summer months. JB Burnett does have to make a kick in Phoenix or at Glendale in the semifinals. Actually, it's a very important kick for him to make so we can continue the football season in our January travels. Logan Thomas is mine because we're talking about when Traore's back, how important he's going to be healthy. Well, he's got to be healthy. We think he will be. Botello, how important he is to be healthy. If you just said, I got to tell you, man, Logan Thomas was the best defensive player several times in practice this spring, I'd be like, all right, well, now they are set because it doesn't matter if Traore and Botello come back. They have that edge rusher. And I know he battled a hamstring injury. I wanted to go back to last spring real fast. We didn't realize how good Adon Schuler was last spring because we hadn't seen enough. But about a week after we did our rankings, talking to people on campus, they're like, it's going to be pretty hard for Rod Hurd to beat out Adon Schuler. If you had that out of Tay Johnson or Luke Talent, where it's like, dude, we have our guy that's going to be joining Adon Schuler this year. I think that would have been another kind of. I basically found all the places they have mini question marks, and that would have changed things for me.
And to your point on Tay Johnson, I will say he might be a year away from a Don Schuler status. Like that may be his spring next year because that is one individual specifically that, and we're almost on a month since spring camp ended. Actually, or since the blue and gold game, will have been a month on Monday. But he's a guy you just keep hearing that name a whole lot in terms of how much he showed up, where he flashed, that he's going to play a lot of football, I think, for Notre Dame in the fall.
Next question from Olo Victory 20. Front seven focus on defense. Who would you say is the highest likelihood of becoming a game wrecker for the 2025 season? Recent pods stress the depth at defensive end and sacks pressures TFL production will likely be spread across the unit, plus maybe KVA and Sneed. But that we might not have a single game wrecker. I see it will be a Traore or Young battle for this distinction. And O'Malley, you can say both if you really want. I do say both, so you guys go ahead.
Go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, I agree that those are two pretty good options. I mean, I think KVA is in there. I also think I was just looking up some of the stats, and I think this is an area where maybe we could see Jaden Osbury kind of sneak up in terms of just like negative play creation. He was second in the team with 7 TFLs last year, and he only played around 400 snaps. So if he, without Jack Kaiser, you see a little uptick in what he does and how they can get him involved on the field. Like I do think that's an area where he showed a lot of potential, and he's kind of that linebacker I think is a little unheralded compared to what some of the other guys that we talk about. But he really is explosive. He has really good instincts for that, and he's like a pretty sure tackler, and he's added some good size this year too. So I think he can kind of maybe make some of those plays like kind of in between the tackles and stuff this year as well.
I think it will be a two-man race to lead the team between KVA and Bryce Young, and I probably would if I was betting some of To's fat stack, I would put my money on KVA to lead the team in TFLs this season. I will also add into there, I think Gabriel Rubio is poised to be a real interior force for Notre Dame. And so he may be a game wrecker or an O line wrecker that does not have the stats to back it up. But I just think, and again, I heard this week he's stepping up from a leadership standpoint. I just think what his stature, his physicality, his strength is going to be really key for Notre Dame. And I think he's poised to have a really impactful season for the Irish. But betting on TFLs, I'm going KVA, just edging out Bryce Young.
Before we move on to the next question, I want to say, all right, I'm sorry, Drew, follow up with this one. If that happens, if Gabriel Rubio is the game wrecker, then Notre Dame isn't going to be involved in that Phoenix game in the semifinal. They might not need the field goal, so that's good. Otherwise, they need the field goal. No one has to hit the field goal in the semifinals. It's important.
Yeah, and I would say too, if they can have that game record, that would be one area where they can kind of really improve upon from last season. I think in terms of tackles for loss per game, they averaged like 5.4, which has them like right in about the middle of the pack for the FBS. And they didn't have anyone who ranked inside the top 100 last year. Riley Mills still led the team with 9 after missing most of the playoff run too. So that's an area, that's one of the few areas you could point at the defense, feel like I think they could improve in that area that way too. So if they do have some of these guys step up and kind of raise the level of negative plays this defense it produces, that could be a significant development.
That's interesting you bring that up. Sorry to jump in before you read this question, Drew, but Penn State was number 2, Ohio State was number 5, Texas was number 6 in terms of TFL, and then we have to go more playoff teams. Boise State was 7, SMU was 10, Tennessee tied for 10, Clemson was 13. So, and Indiana was 16. So it's an interesting stat. I mean, obviously it's a useful stat for defenses because I just read, I think, 8, 9 playoff teams there.
Yeah, definitely. Our next question is from Maltese Irish. Having seen him in many of the in-home recruiting visit tweets going out, what more could you tell me about Javon J. Codlin, aka Coach Cod? Can you also recap the responsibilities of the various analysts on staff and what they are or aren't permitted to do with the team?
Okay, well, we'll start big picture here in terms of the analysts. And since the NCAA changed a couple of years ago, the rules and regulations on analysts as to what they can and can't do, they're pretty involved in all aspects. They can now be on-field coaches. You still have the 10 countable coaches, and that's the only number of headsets you can have your coaching staff wearing on a game day Saturday. But those coaches now can do everything. And there are some programs that are already moving to change those titles from analyst to assistant coach, or you're seeing more schools now saying, this guy's my outside linebackers coach and this guy's my inside linebackers coach, whereas one of those guys might have previously been defensive analyst and senior defensive analyst. Bill Belichick, for one, is very much modeling his North Carolina program. He's hired a bunch of dudes that are his recruiters, and then he's hired a bunch of coaches to be his coaches. And again, they might be assistant D-line coach and D-line coach, which is the NFL model. I've got a really good friend in the NFL who's the assistant wide receivers coach, and he does all the coaching. And so that's the standard now, because the NCAA changed that. You can now call those guys coaches. You don't have the same rules and regulations. I think that changed 2 years ago, maybe the summer of 23. It's been
It makes sense, right, JB? Because then you're not hiding it. It's just like you're doing it anyway. You'd always look out there at those Notre Dame practices and be like, boy, Kyle McCarthy's doing a lot of coaching. James Laurinaitis is doing a lot of coaching. So now it's just like legal. I think it's better.
Yes, that's exactly right. And let's remember, Max Bulla was the linebackers coach from the time he got here, even though he was senior defensive analyst. And then he got made the official linebackers coach when Chris O'Leary left. So
he kind of said it, didn't he? He was like, well, I've been the linebacker coach since like last October.
Yes, exactly. He was running the position meetings and everything. But again, that rule has been formally changed. So really great question from Maltese. And then on Javon Codlin, I'll give Maltese additional credit on this because obviously I knew him and knew of him, and that Notre Dame had brought him on earlier this year to fill one of its analyst spots that had been vacated, and so I did some research on him then. But this reminded me that he has been so much more visible on the recruiting trail this spring for Notre Dame, and he's working in the secondary. He helps on the back end of the defense for Notre Dame. He's working really in lockstep a lot with Mike Mickens. But on the recruiting trail, and if this has been reported elsewhere and I've not seen it, then that's my fault. Yell at me all you want to. But his presence is huge. And this question caused me to call an agent in LA yesterday and ask him what he knew about him. And he said, I love him. I don't rep him, but I love him. And I've only heard good things about him. And I've known of him since he was coaching at the D2 level and working on a defensive staff at the D2 level. And that's when I first came to hear of him. So that's a little more insight on him. But on the recruiting front, Notre Dame is not sending out any of its three coordinators this spring on the road. It's capitalizing on other people. So Chris Ash and Mike Denbrock and Marty Biaggi all are staying home during this cycle, again, because it's Marcus Freeman, as I was told, wanting more of the NFL model. So those guys are in the office every day. They're game planning. They're self-scouting. They're working on what they want to accomplish in the summer, how they want to hit the ground running when preseason camp opens. But all three of Notre Dame's coordinators are not on the road this spring. And it's because guys like Javon Cottle and J-Cod are stepping up, and Notre Dame feels really comfortable sending him out on the road. And he's frankly got juice. That was the point that the agent was making to me yesterday in LA, is that when he's been around him, he's got a charisma to him. He's got some juice. And that's why I think Notre Dame feels very comfortable sending him out on the road. And that's why, Maltese, I give you an A for the day for the best question.
Yeah, and I do remember when he got hired, like one of the things was like West Virginia specifically used him as a recruiter too. So I'm sure that was in that mindset. And this is something we can bring in this guy to do. We know it's where he excels.
And Jay
The
Cod
other,
sounds better than Coach Cod, I will say.
yeah, real quickly, just the other analyst, it's very similar. You've got you had to replace Michael Bearden, who was the assistant wide receiver coach that got hired by the Browns in this last cycle. So you've got a guy that's working with the wide receivers with Mike Brown that helps very closely there. You've got Hunter Bivens' brother Harris Bivens, who followed Mike Denbrock from LSU, and he'd been a football operations guy at LSU and got hired in as an analyst, and now I think he's the senior offensive analyst. You still got Trent Miles over there, who's one of the most experienced coaches on staff, who is definitely more in the analyst role. He's not on the practice field as involved. He's doing a lot of the research and a lot of the film study or video study now and all of those things. But every guy has a role within the role. You got Seabass, who's very involved with the defensive line with Al Washington. You've got the guy Kurt, his last name escapes me. He's basically Gino Guidugli's assistant quarterbacks coach. And then you've got a guy that Joe Rudolph also uses as well for the offensive line. And then you've got a guy like Jesse Schmidt, who almost got hired away from Notre Dame this cycle, who's basically the assistant special teams coordinator. He helps Marty Biaggi really run a lot of the special teams when Marty Biaggi is helping in the secondary.
Next question. Hayden Adams Z, our Lexington, Kentucky resident, I believe. There's a lot of talk about Jaywan Sider not playing as many running backs, but how much is that up to him? Doesn't Mike Denbrock, as offensive coordinator, have the final say on who he wants to given down and distance and play call?
I mean, I'm sure that is something Denbrock obviously has say over, but also you bring in a guy like Sider who is also the associate head coach and has a lot of experience, makes seven figures. I think you're going to give a lot of deference to him and what he thinks is best for the room, and also his personal coaching style as well. So I'm sure if Denbrock really wants Kedron Young in on a short yardage play, he can say, hey, put this guy in. But I don't, if how Sider wants to run his room and prepare the team each and every week is going to have a significant impact on how that room runs.
Yeah, and this almost ties into my answer on that last question from Maltese about Mike Denbrock not being on the road this spring because they're taking more of an NFL approach. You've made Mike Denbrock the CEO of your offense, and you don't expect him to micromanage every position group. So he might have strong feelings about a package for a guy or playing players in certain situations. but he's not managing the running back room any more than he's managing the O-line room
Right.
or Mike Brown's wide receiver room. So, and again, like great point by Drew. Jawan Sider and Mike Mickens were the first two regular assistant coaches, regular in air quotes, non-coordinator assistant coaches to get 3-year deals from Notre Dame. So they both have 3-year deals. Both of those assistants are making 7 figures in addition to Lauren Lando and Chris Ash and Mike Denbrock. And so you bring a guy in like that who's a very veteran coach who gets that associate head coach title, who you got from another playoff team, you're going to let him run the room the way that he believes he needs to run the room. Now, it is a definite difference in that room, and it was been reiterated to me even since the conclusion of spring camp. It's a very different approach, and it's a very honed in approach than what Dylan McCullough had in his 9-job board that he had in his running back room, and would assign one of the 9 jobs to every running back.
Famous 9 jobs, to quote Dylan McCullough. You've all heard about my famous 9 jobs. Yes, that was one of my favorite things when he talked about his own famous comment. But listen, yeah, good good coaches at any position are trusted by their coordinators. These are the best players. This is the best player for this job. Now, if things go wrong, it's Mike Denbrock's job to say, you need to quit putting him out there. I need
Right.
Jeremiah Love out there. That is something, but this is all decided during the week. In other words, when a
Right.
running back's going in, and I'm sure and even Freeman can be like, hey, really appreciate this rotation we got going here on a hot day, but J Love has 6 carries. Why don't we go ahead and feature him a little bit here? You can step in those situations,
Right.
but you have to trust your position coaches. And if you don't, they're not the position coach anymore. That's when it comes down to the offensive coordinator making changes. If Notre Dame's 3-3, all of a sudden you're going to see Mike Denbrock say, we're going to change something here. That's how it comes down.
I think this is me to read this question. And so from Alan Rutherford, it would be, at what point in the spring do you fire up your grill for the first time for steady summer use? What's the meat that kicks off the season after the winter hiatus? I will definitely answer, but I will yield the floor to you, fine gentlemen.
The issue I have here, I would have a different issue a couple years ago. I have not been home at night without a child with me elsewhere since April, since spring break. And I will not be home at night without a child at a field or court until Memorial Day Sunday. So we don't get to grill yet. Go ahead, guys. That's a lot of fun at home. There's a lot of driving and sports going on here. So normally it would have already happened about a month ago.
I
I don't know if I have
I
a
would,
grill anymore, for crying out loud. Sorry, Drew. There's going.
no, you're good. I mean, I don't think I have a grill. It might be one in the garage, so I'm not the best person to answer this question. Also, my wife is vegan, and I don't eat a lot of red meat, so any answer I would give would probably be pretty lame. So I'll also yield to Bryce.
The best
God.
it got lame when you said you're not sure if you had a grill, but you covered it up well with the reasonings for that. So.
Alan Rutherford, I should have asked and answered this question and left these two jagaloons on mute. I would say that, and my wife would assent to this, I never close the grill for the season. Like you could see footprints in the snow at certain times of the year
To interrupt, I grill all winter and all fall when I have time. Spring, by the way, is the worst time of the year in the O'Malley household in 2024 and 2025. I am not home. Go ahead.
There you go. So I don't ever completely get away from the grill. Now I do have a sous vide machine that Jess got me as a Christmas gift, maybe Christmas of 23. So that takes the place of most of my grilling over the winter. What is the grill du jour once it truly is spring, and I know I'm going to get to start grilling multiple times a week? It's almost always steaks from Snake River Farms, and that in recent years has been a Christmas gift to me from some friends around the country. Sometimes it's a gift to myself. I got a Snake River Farms text message this morning. I'm addicted to the Snake River Farms and all of their offerings. They actually have Wagyu hot dogs and a 5-pack for $12. And so you would think I was a paid Snake River Farms spokesman. I'm not. I'm just a very strong believer in the product. And now Snake River Farms is even sold locally at Martin's Heritage Square. So Martin's Heritage Square, get your butts on board as a sponsor for the Irish Illustrated podcast.
Good point. Also, we have lost our producer, Jack Freeman, from the screen. He left. I believe he is leaving his home and heading towards John Bryce's house for the evening because Bryce talked about what he's grilling. So that's too bad. This will be a delayed podcast as a result. No, this question, Alan knows me well, and I'm lamenting not being able to grill because I was simply not home. But someday soon, I'm heading to Heritage Square Martins and getting some of that Wagyu and not the hot dogs. So it's going to be good times.
Monday night, I did for Cinco de Mayo. I grilled fajitas, and so I had just some prime sirloin steak, and then I did some Asian barbecue chicken, and I also did some beer can chicken. And the beer can chicken was like literally just pull apart tender.
Monday night, I'm looking. I got home at 10:45 or 9:45 from Mishawaka Fieldhouse, and I did not have any food. So that was the problem with that day. Wash ND. Do you think the constant consternation about ND's high school wide receiver recruiting is a little overblown? Of all the positions, wide receiver probably has the most options in the transfer portal, and ND has become quite successful at mining it, especially this past offseason. Is using the transfer portal annually for high-end productive wide receivers the best option regardless, considering ND's poor track record of high school recruiting over the last 15 years or so? That does change the crux of the answer. It is accepting that they will not recruit. In this answer, it's accepting they're not going to recruit the way Ohio State recruits wide receivers, I guess.
I would still say it's not overblown because I would say it's still been the worst position group since Marcus Freeman took over, maybe all 3 years. And I agree, Malachi Fields, like there's a lot of reasons to be high on him, but like they also took 3 transfers last year and none of those quite worked out like maybe we would have fans would have hoped they would either. So it's not necessarily a reliable way to do it. You're also not going to find a Malachi Fields every year. And so you even going back to some of those mid years under Brian Kelly, he was still able to find, for the occasional first and second round draft pick. And right now we're looking at guys who are like, maybe they can go, late. We're hoping Bo Collins might get drafted in the 7th round. And part of that was like, well, he'll have a lot of utility on special teams. If you're saying that about some of your best wide receivers, that's not necessarily a great metric for success. And I think it's less relevant now, but Bill Connolly from ESPN, he does the SP Plus. He used to say like returning production at wide receiver was the most significant factor for a team's like offensive success that fall. So maybe that's changed a little bit in the transfer portal era. That was something he said like in the late 2010s, but that is a very important indicator and something Notre Dame's been lacking.
I mean, Notre Dame has, I don't think it's necessarily overblown, but I agree with the sentiment that it's easy to go shopping in the portal and there's always a Chris Mitchell or a Jaden Harrison out there that's at a G5 program that puts up some silly numbers and you're Notre Dame and you've got a chance to go get him. I would also point out that they have recruited some very highly regarded wide receiver prospects, even in the Marcus Freeman era. I mean, Chancey Stuckey got them, helped them get 5-star Cam Williams, and then Jaden Greathouse and Rico Flores, I think, were both consensus 4 stars. Micah Gilbert, a consensus 4-star. So there have been some guys there. I will maintain that more than an indictment of Notre Dame's recruiting at that position, it's a byproduct of Notre Dame's offense right now. And maybe if CJ Carr is your starting quarterback and does what we discussed earlier this week and throws a lot more passing touchdowns than what we've seen out of Notre Dame in recent years, then you would hope that would immediately start paying dividends as soon as this December and on into the 26 calendar year. So to me, I think it's very much a byproduct of Notre Dame right now. It's kind of known as tight end U. It's known as O-line U. And then Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and those guys are certainly stamping Notre Dame back as a real force at the running back position, along with what Audric Estime did. So I think it's more byproduct of the offense has not featured wide receivers to help a whole lot in recruiting. And I think Drew and T.O. both have had some great stats about it's been since 2018 since Notre Dame's had 2 players with 45 or more catches.
Yes.
So I think that's significant. You've got Jeremiah Smith, and Ryan Williams making Sports Center plays for Ohio State and Alabama, respectively. And you just don't have that right now out of the Notre Dame offense. You have Jeremiah Love making Sports Center plays because he's leaping over dudes, or even with a sore hamstring, racing 99 yards for the first touchdown of the expanded CFP.
And ND heavily does lean into our culture is line driven running back, and defensive line driven as well. I will point out guys like Mitchell, Collins, Chris Mitchell, Bo Collins, Jaden Harrison, anyone along those lines. Notre Dame's going to always be able to find. However, you think of the like national champions, so Georgia and Michigan would be the only ones in the last 10 years, off the top of my head, that did not have sick wide receiver rooms. Like Clemson, Alabama, Clemson, LSU, Alabama, then Georgia and Michigan be the exception. Ohio State. That's those rooms are disgusting compared to what Notre Dame could put out there a wide receiver. I agree with you that Notre Dame can always mine the portal for twos and fours, threes and fours easily. Twos is fair. I mean, twos is fair. But you really need to find. You got to be able to get Michael Floyd every other year to Notre Dame, right? And I'm going back. That's 18 cycles ago. We didn't know Golden Tate was going to be as good as he was. That's why I'm not using him. Michael Floyd was the last guy that came in. You're like, that guy's awesome. He's going to be awesome. He was awesome. They had awesome receivers. Will Fuller was phenomenal. Golden Tate was tremendous. Shout out to other websites. He was better than Michael Floyd. You know who you are. But Michael Floyd's the one where Notre Dame should be able to get Michael Floyd every 3 years if you're going to be that good of a program. Ohio State gets him every single season.
Yeah, and I'm not even saying they need to get to that point. Just like I think,
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, but like since 2019, Chase Claypool was drafted. I think since then the only wide receiver drafted was Ben Skoranek, and he was like a seventh round pick. Somebody correct me if I misspoke there, but
Austin was not drafted, right, but he's still viable in the league. He's around. But again, there's 150, as I said when he left. There's 150 Kevin Austin there.
Yeah, so I think that's the thing. Like just having guys who are even day two picks on occasion would be a significant step up from what we've seen over the last 5 or 6 seasons.
From Chad Flanagan, everyone seems much more confident in the defensive tackle position. It seems a lot of this is optimism from the Jersey scrimmage, which was against mostly second team linemen. This kind of tracks with what Bryce was saying about what he would have liked to have seen. Guys like Onye really struggle in the blue goal game against the starters. Give me some reasons to think this could be a good to really good set of a defensive tackle group. So he's definitely leaving out the ends.
Okay, I'll go first on this one. Well, I've touched on it with Gabriel Rubio, and I don't want to overemphasize him. I just think that he is really positioned himself for a strong year, and he is quite physically imposing and physically very strong. We have to remember Onye was back this spring, and he looked like he had absolutely added some good weight, added some good upper body strength, but he was still returning to football for the first time in several months and returning to practicing football 3 days a week, 15 times over the balance of spring for the first time in several months. You remember, he had been away from the team, I want to say, from almost like October onward in the fall?
It was Stanford week, yeah. That was
Yeah,
right there.
yeah.
So, yep.
So exactly. So he'd been away from the team for basically the final 10 of its 16 game run, if not the final 11 of its 16 game run. So, but he's played a lot of football. He looks bigger. He looks stronger. You've got some different pieces there. Then you've got Heinisch in there. I think you've got some other guys that you can move in and around and do some things. Will they be so gifted at end that they even use a Bryce Young some in the middle on a third down package if they've only got three down linemen? I think you've got
For sure. Yeah. I think
exactly.
for sure they'll do that.
And so I think for me, it's I'm encouraged by the sum of the parts, and not because you've got one singular Lamborghini out there, but I think you've got a good garage full of cars.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Like it's the depth. Like they have several guys you think could, kind of start playing in there, and then they have some younger guys like maybe they can start working in. But I think like with Anye specifically, like that was also like I mean, Notre Dame has a pretty good interior offensive line. He's not going to, Sullivan Absher was the center for a lot of that, who's, 6'7", I don't know, 320 pounds. Like he's usually Anya has the size and length advantage over a lot of guys. He's going to be going at center. And then you also have Billy Strouth and Charles Jagasaw. But even with that, like some of my positivity on him too is like seeing him in one-on-one reps, just knocking Charles Jagasaw back during like the Jersey scrimmage we got to see and stuff too. So I think Notre Dame's not going most defensive tackles aren't going to win or dominate Notre Dame's interior offensive line. Like we don't expect that, but to see him having success against some of those guys, especially as like JB said, where he missed a lot of time last fall, to come back and show that he can still do that against a guy who, again, Charles Jagasaw is like, he's getting a lot of love as a potential first round pick. I know he's inexperienced, but he's a big, strong offensive tackle, and we know he has the type of strength and kind of quickness to kind of get up under him and knock him back, and that's a really encouraging sign.
I am still in the whole is greater than the sum of its parts because I kind of look at it, you say, which is good. That's a good position for that as opposed to quarterback. Um, you look at it like I consider right now Rubio and Dawson would be great if they're both your second best defensive tackle. I consider Heinisch, Onye, and Hughes cool if they're your third, fourth, and fifth best defensive tackles. Somebody, it would be great if they do what JB is saying here. He's hearing about Rubio. If by the end of September you go, that's your number one defensive tackle. I think that's important. It's kind of like a Don Schuler, how good he became as opposed to just a guy that was out there. I think they could use that from this group because one guy gets hurt. And then I wanted to include this question because different people will be high on Sean Sevillano or Armel Mukum. We have to stress their theories. They're just theoretical right now. They were not allowed to play in the playoffs. So that's how high they were on those guys going into the playoff. Now, Sevillano was a freshman. Mukum was a redshirt freshman. It's time to see those guys not be theories, to see them out there and actually play football because when people say, hey, we saw Armel Mukum look good in a practice, we all liked Sevillano's quickness for his size. It's also like Sevillano's good for his size for a freshman. Doesn't matter if what your for your size for a freshman is when you're actually out there against Texas A&M if you have to be in week 2 or at Arkansas in week 6 in the heat. Then it's you just got to be a player. So I think that's kind of how I would couch it. Someone needs to step up like Bryce has said about Rubio, or it could be Dawson. And then the other guys got to stay healthy and be quality players.
All right. I don't know if I should feel targeted here with this responsibility of reading this question, but from fellow University of Tennessee alumnus Jim Bob Cooter 55, of the incoming freshmen yet to report, which of these freshmen has the best chance to earn minutes? Zachary, Golden, Pritchett, or Burgess?
I think, does he mean Flanagan?
He did not include Flanagan, but let's include write-in votes as well.
Okay. Because I think Flanagan is probably mine, just given the depth at tight end. I think just also watching his high school film, like there's a lot that impressed me. And he's also a guy who I think was more valuable to his high school team on the defensive side of the ball. So seeing what he does when he gets to Notre Dame, where he's only focused on tight end and developing those skills. And again, there's opportunity there. My other top player in this class was Mark Zachary. And so I think there's a lot of reason to be high on him. And he's an incredibly long player. And we've seen what he's not, I think he's only like 5'11", but he's lanky. And we've seen what Mike Mickens does with those type of players very quickly. You're talking about a Leonard Moore or Ben Morris and some of those guys. Like, I'm curious to see what he develops into and if they can find a role for him or even if he can be used as a depth piece if, something happens like it did last year where somebody goes down. So those are my two.
I agree. In good health, Flanagan as a tight end has the best opportunity coming in. Then I defer to the recent past of Mike Mickens and just say, yeah, Zachary and Golden, because Ben Morrison burned us all on the countdown in 2022. You guys weren't with Irish Illustrated yet. Leonard Moore got us all last year. Mike Mickens tends to find these guys, and I promise you, for the first time ever during the countdown, I was thinking, not quite sure about this freshman, so I'm going to rank him higher than usual, where I used to say, I'm not quite sure about this freshman, so I'm going to rank him lower than usual. That's how good Notre Dame has been at featuring the correct freshman to help. So Flanagan's been my choice for several months. I'll stay with it, assuming good health for Flanagan. And I gotta go corner again, because there is an opportunity to be the number 4 corner on this team. There, you can take it. You're not taking 3, I don't think, unless you are. You're not taking Carson Hobbs' spot at 3 unless you are literally the next Ben Morrison and Leonard Moore, because that's what it would take. But those are good ones. JB, you have a difference anywhere?
I don't. I would say, especially as long as Notre Dame stays healthy at the end spots and then gets health back in terms of Botello and Traore, that Burgess is really talented. I think he's a very enticing prospect, but Notre Dame has, for a change, some real enviable depth at the ends as long as those two guys come back healthy. And also, I think, again, we saw it some. We're going to see more of KVA being able to do some stuff off the edge. So I think that makes it tough for a guy like Burgess to crack in there. I think it's Flanagan. And then I'm curious to see if Zachary can challenge, maybe even for some reps at nickel.
Yeah, I think Burgess is going to take some time, like you said, to develop in general too. Like he's a guy who I think played like some like inside linebacker in high school, and even watching him at Notre Dame's like camp last year, like if he didn't get by with his first move in an offensive lineman, and maybe like a guy who's a 3-star recruit got their hands on him, like he was kind of done. And so I'm sure he's developed since then, but he's kind of a guy who I think he looks like $1 million. You see the tools are there, but he's a guy who definitely needs to learn some like pass rushing moves and how to counter and things like that. I'm not sure he's gonna be there when he arrives over the summer.
Final question. Oh, sorry, Drew, you want to read this one?
Oh, yes. Final question from JJ Post. I believe Pete has
Oh,
said,
it's Bobby 1556. I think we hit JJ Post early.
oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, you're right. Sorry, I wrote that down. I added that in. My apologies. Bobby 1556. Over the last number of podcasts, you guys have said that the depth of the Irish roster is what has leveled this program up from where Brian Kelly has had it. Who are the guys that are backups on the 2025 roster that would be studs or stars in the BK era?
I want to make sure we don't just rip on like the bad BK team of 2016 because he had a lot of really good teams. So this is important to look at guys that would play for good Brian Kelly teams. Let's start at linebacker. In 2018, you could not, this is a playoff team, you could not take ever, and they didn't, Tavon Coney and Drew Tranquil off the field. Who are your backup? Let's say your backup linebackers are Sneed and Osbury. Those guys would rotate in with Tavon Coney and Drew Tranquil. You wouldn't beat out Tranquil, but you wouldn't beat out a senior Coney, but you would be pushing these guys because they're a different level of athletes too. 2019, Tony Jones was the default starting running back on the team. Quality player, right? All right. Aeneas Williams, Jadarian Price, maybe Keedron Young. That's an 11-2 Notre Dame football team. And then in 2015, this got to credit Pete Sampson for tracking snaps before Pro Football Focus did it for us. Isaac Rochelle and Sheldon Day played more snaps in the Virginia game than there were snaps in the Virginia game. Because they were in there when there were penalties that were called back. So they actually played more snaps than existed. Think about the defensive tackle depth over the years. We're talking about defensive tackle needing help. All of these guys would play heavily in that position at that time. And that is maybe the most talented, not top to bottom, but talented top end Notre Dame team. People could remember that 15 team that had a lot of top tier guys and then a big drop off.
Yeah, I even think too about I think was it Asmar Bilal like the rover in 2018. Like if you had Jaden Osbury, who's like the fourth linebacker and who was second on the team in tackles for loss as a sophomore, if you had him on that team with his athleticism and all that stuff, like imagine how much of an upgrade and how much we'd probably be talking about him if this were back then too. And this may be not as relevant for this upcoming year. If you compare it, like Ian Book obviously started those 2018 through 2020. But if Kenny Minchie was like the upcoming guy and his potential in some of those like late Brian Kelly years, if they had him going into 2021 and didn't have to go to the transfer portal or something like that, or this is the next guy, like I think there'd be a lot of reasons to be like, look at how he runs, look at some of the throws he makes, his arm talent, all those things. Like, again, he might be somebody we're really a lot higher on. It's just like he's getting compared to CJ Carr, who has some other intangibles that maybe Minchie doesn't have yet as well.
Well, and look at this spring. You had Steve Angeli out there for basically the entire spring competing alongside Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr. And then you had Blake Hebert, who was the mid-year enrollee and a consensus four-star prospect. I think that to me, that's a huge difference in what we saw, especially down the stretch between Brian Kelly and Tommy Rees. It seemed like, and maybe you guys agree, maybe you disagree, it seemed like they recruited a really promising guy every other cycle at the quarterback position, and then just filled it
Yes.
out with some guys that they believed could be program players and that would stick around for 4 years and be reliable in a pinch, but not necessarily threatening for the job. That's certainly how it's been conveyed to me. So there, and then
And
I
they
just
still left. And those guys still left. Yeah.
and from there, then also, I think the secondary. I just think the secondary is so much better, deeper, faster in this regime than what it was. Like I've made the comment before, and had people pointed out to me last year as well, starting at Texas A&M, that like Notre Dame's back seven looked like an SEC back seven. And I don't think there have been a lot of years.
No.
Certainly, those 18 and 20 playoff teams didn't have back seven SEC or Clemson speed in those years.
No, they had players, but not the quality depth of the players. Because obviously
Yeah.
you got Love and Hamilton in that, but that's different.
To your point, JB, I mean, Jalen Elliott started for a playoff team. He ran a 4.8 at the combine. So that was a lot. I mean, he was a good player, but I mean, that's he didn't get drafted because of that time. But that's the level of again, good player, but he's not an NFL level athlete at that speed, and you have plenty of guys who you feel would run much faster than that who may not even play a ton yet this year.
Yeah, I would probably put a line of demarcation to when they got a little better in the Kelly era with once he brought in Love, Pride, that class started getting quality defensive backs again because you went with like Love and Pride and then well, Alohi Gilman was a transfer, but those count too. Alohi Gilman came in as a transfer. Elliott developed. Hamilton is I mean, that's a lightning rod for these. That's the reason some of these guys came to Notre Dame is because they mentioned Kyle Hamilton at least into the Benjamin Morrison era. Then it really took off with them obviously since then. But boy, those teams, I think Pete's brought this up before in Priester. 2012, they don't have a backup corner, they don't have a starting corner, and they're asking Kavari Russell to move from running back to corner, and he does a great job. But that's not Leonard Moore and Benjamin Morrison moving from a different position to corner. So I think all those positions and safety has gotten good at Notre Dame for a while now. But man, you look back at some of the safeties. They've one starter or something along those lines. We all love Matthias Farley, but the guy moved to safety to help save the 2012 season. It took him he became an NFL player and developed, but that's not the same situation as the depth of things they have now. And like we said, JB, Kennedy Urlacher leaves, you're like, oh, that's too bad. I like Kennedy Urlacher. Whereas that would have been like a devastating development to Brian Kelly's first 6-7 teams.
That's a great point. Kennedy Urlacher was going to play a lot of snaps this year, but he was a number 3 safety.
Yeah, at best. I mean, that's the best he could hope for because Tay Johnson is there as well. That is it for this edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. We'll be back on Monday, May 12th. And hopefully there'll be some more. Maybe we'll get some more schedule news, some more roster grandfathering in news. I don't know. You don't want like technical roster news coming up here. It can't be good stuff for Notre Dame at this point. So until then, for John Bryce, the Football Scoop, Drew Mentok of Irish Illustrated, I am Tim O'Malley. Thanks for watching and listening.